Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Welcome back, and we have a real treat today as we are going to spend just over an hour in the company of the very exceptional human of hospitality, Michel Roux Jr. Now, I was particularly grateful that Michel took some time out of his diary right now to chat, since most of you listening to this, I'm sure, will be aware of the death of his absolute legendary dad, Albert Roux, on the 4th of January this year. Michel is back from France to deal with the arrangements and the funeral, and he's managing the challenges of his own closed businesses, and yet was still generous enough to spend some time chatting to me for all of you listening to enjoy. I'd also just like to share what an utter privilege it feels to get to have a one-to-one conversation with such greats of our industry. With over 120 episodes now recorded, if you told me at the start of this podcast adventure that I would get to spend some quality time one-on-one with some of my hospitality heroes, I would have given you a sceptical glance or two. But as a result of so many of you listening on a regular basis, and your emails of support and your subscriptions and your reviews of the podcast, you motivate me to get in touch with such great guests, and you motivate those great guests to say yes to what is often a pretty detailed conversation. So thank you for joining me on this adventure. It really does mean a lot. Okay, best off I get out of the way and make some space for our guest, and we're going to touch on Michel's family connections and following in the family legacy. We'll chat about the business side of being a chef and the importance of knowing your numbers, and that successful restaurants are rarely only about the quality of the food. We touch on what else it takes and how you need to make a customer feel to really enjoy their visit and want to return regularly. We also touch on some of the cultural differences between France and the UK, as well as the differences in the casual dining sector and even the street food scene, and whether we will ever see Michel in his very own street food truck. And of course, we cover the pandemic and Michel's hopes for the future. Yes, in business, perhaps more importantly, with his daughter and his grandson. I really hope you enjoy the conversation. I certainly did. Cheers. Michel Roux Jr., if ever there was a human of hospitality, I think literally being almost born in a kitchen and certainly brought up in one helps you qualify. You're a chef, restaurateur, media personality, author, father, runner. I'm very excited to chat to you. Where in the world are you joining me from today, Michel? Because unfortunately, we're not sat face to face, are we?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not. And I am in Clapham, South London. And looking out towards this lovely grey sky, it's threatening to rain as usual.
Yeah. Okay. So is that your home, or you're not in an office, presumably?
No, not in an office. I've got a flat in Clapham, and I've lived here actually for over 30 years before Clapham became Clarms, I think.
You're hanging out with the cool kids, Michel.
Yeah.
So look, just to start with, really sorry, sort of conscious of timing, really sorry to hear about the passing of your dad a couple of weeks ago. You must have been very proud to see this outpouring of love and support from so many people in the industry when the news broke.
Absolutely. I mean, I knew and I appreciated, how much of a legend he was. But wow, yeah. I mean, just quite simply breathtaking. The messages that I've received, the letters, the book of condolences, which we've put up on our website as well. Some absolutely amazing little anecdotes and stories, which just fill me with joy reading it. I knew I had a special dad, but it just makes it even more special now. Amazing.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, yeah, must be very humbling to receive it. But thank you for carving out some time to have a chat with me. With that sort of very recognised family name, and I know you knew from a very young age that you wanted to be a chef. Did you feel overwhelmed by that level of expectation? I'm thinking if I was David Beckham's kids, the last place I might go is on a football pitch to avoid that comparison. How did you find that in those early years, knowing what you wanted to do? Did you feel that sort of burden of the Roux name?
I think so. I mean, in many respects, the name Roux in France is very, very common. It's as common as, say, Smith here in England. So when I left school at 16 and went to work in France, yes, my boss and my colleagues knew that I came from a famous restaurateur in England, but in everyday life, college, etc., when I was at college in France, no one knew me from Adam. So, it didn't really make that much difference. But I suppose the burden was there because obviously, the brothers had already carved their business and of course, the names, Le Gavroche, the waterside inn was already well established. So I suppose, it's never going to be easy to follow in footsteps that big. But I always wanted to, as a child, I've always wanted to do the same as my dad and my uncle, and that's work in this wonderful industry that is ours, the hospitality industry.
Yeah. So I speak to quite a lot. I tend to focus on the sort of the smaller, the independent side, I guess, of the hospitality sector. So I get to speak to a lot of family people and family businesses, and often sort of multi-generational. And I think there's this external perception sometimes that, you get an easy ride if you're going into the family business. But actually quite often the opposite is true. And any business owner almost puts their kids, they don't want to just give them the opportunity. They want them to earn it, improve it, and maybe make it even harder than it would be if you weren't a member of the family. What was your experience as a kid in those early days when you were sort of a helping hand? Were you given a leg up, or were you told you've got to work twice as hard as the next man?
Twice as hard and more. I think Dad and Uncle were very, very hard on myself and Alain. We chose to follow them, but they made damn sure that we knew how difficult it was, and how much dedication we needed to achieve. Well, I was going to say be as good as them. We're never going to be as good as them because they were the forerunners. They are the ones that actually, started it all. So, they were tough. They were very. I mean, many a times I was, tears in my eyes working at Le Gavroche and bringing up, stuff to the pass, and the old man, no, but it was forming, and it was the right way, I think, to do it. My first job was, I think it was 13, washing pots and pans at one of the restaurants in the city, and I did that to earn money to buy my first racing bike, and then my first stereo set as well. So I'm working over the summer holidays, cleaning pans, peeling spuds and such like at the age of 13, 14, 15, before actually going to hotel catering. So, they instilled in me and in Alain a real value and a knowledge and appreciation of hard work. And you didn't get anything, for free. You had to work for it.
Yeah. I'm going to play that clip back to my 13-year-old son, who thus far has not offered to come in and do the washing up and peel the carrots at my restaurant, Michel. So I'll see if I can motivate him. I think times have changed a little bit, I suppose. Although I guess Emily started pretty early, did she? Your daughter? How soon was she in the kitchen helping out, or was it later in the modern world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at a very, very young age. I mean, probably about the same age as I did, and she always, same as me, said, I want to be, in the hospitality industry. I want to work as a chef. I want to do the same as my dad. So yeah, very young age, she would come in to Le Gavroche, and I'd stick her in a corner, and she'd blanch and peel 10 boxes of tomatoes and concasse and peel buds, and I'd sometimes do some more delicate, intricate work as well. So no, she absolutely adored it.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear it wasn't too easy. So the opportunity was presumably there to go straight into the family business if you needed to. But were you always very motivated to travel, because you ended up sort of traveling fairly extensively and working in quite a lot of places before you came back into the family business? Was that always your plan?
Yeah. Now, so my father and uncle actually said, look, if you want to get into the business, the first thing you've got to do is learn to be a pastry chef. So I left school at 16, and the advice was do pastry first rather than go into the kitchen and then go into pastry. It's pastry is very specific, and a lot of chefs regret the fact that they don't do enough pastry work. So I did a pastry apprenticeship in Paris, and that was amazing. It was one of I think most special moments in my life, as apprenticeships should be, because they are not you're not just learning a trade or a craft. You're also learning life skills. If you have a good apprenticeship chef or a mentor, which I did, I was very fortunate, and that was truly amazing. And then yes, then I went to the south of France, to Lyon, worked there a couple of years, worked back in Paris again. So worked my way around France in different restaurants away from the family, which I think is great, and that's the way it should be. And then I travelled to Hong Kong as well, and worked 6 months in Hong Kong. And then came back. So I think the easier option may have been to work within the family, but from the get go. But I think that actually going away, learning your trade, and then coming back, you're actually enriching the family business by all the knowledge that you've acquired elsewhere. And you can have a different perspective as well on the business. So I think it's the way it should be done, and was done in my case. If I were to do it again, I would probably travel even more. And I recommend all young chefs, actually, and waiters as well, front of house too, to travel the world when you're young. There are restaurants and hotels all over the world, and obviously sometimes it's difficult to get work permits and visas, but with a bit of it can be done, and enjoy it. Travel the world, open up your mind and your experiences. And if I were to do it again, I would spend more time in Asia, definitely.
Yeah, I was very lucky actually. When I was 20, I went away for a couple of years and spent about 9 months in Asia. Not in kitchens, but just incredibly energetic, vibrant, sort of the chaos of humanity, and loved it. And I would certainly encourage my kids to do the same. Although I'll miss them. It's hard to imagine when they're 11. Although homeschooling at the moment, I might encourage they go sooner rather than later, but they can't. Luckily, there are no flights. So on that pre sort of Le Gavroche part of your journey, you clearly learned a lot about the business element as well as the food element of restaurants. Was there somewhere specifically, because they can be very different, I think, can't it, being a chef or being a restaurateur? Was there somewhere specifically where you learn that business element? And what do you think the difference is between a chef and a restaurateur?
Yeah. I mean, my dad sent me off to a chartered accountant, actually, who was a friend, to work there for, I think it was about 3 or 4 months, which at the time I thought, what am I going to be doing there? Crunching numbers. And I know, not forgetting that I absolutely hated maths at school. In fact, I was terrible at maths. But he was absolutely right, as he usually was, to send me there to learn how to do the basic accounting. And just learning how to read a balance sheet, read a profit and loss account, and just basic business acumen, which I learnt over the 3 months, which was fabulous. Which means that I can talk to an accountant, I can understand the figures, and it's basic. I'm not a chartered, an accountant, or but I understand the figures. And that is important. And I think all young chefs and front of house should do some kind of training in that respect, because we constantly hear of chefs going mad, opening a business, opening a restaurant, and you look at the price structure and you think, hang on a minute, and then you see they're driving a Ferrari after they've only been open 6 months, and you think, hang on a minute, what's going on here?
They've normally forgotten about the VAT bill, I think.
Yeah, and then they're closed. and they've gone bust, and they scratch their head and wonder why. And yeah, business acumen or business knowledge is so important.
Yeah, I don't think people realise how much of a chef, certainly when you get into a senior position, how much of it is maths, isn't it? Your GP on food is really important, and all too often you see people almost, I suppose, promoted beyond their skill set. Do you have, and lots of chefs are creative, and they've often come not through the sort of traditional route of education, like you say. Some of them you see either setting up their own restaurant and perhaps failing. Some of them you see going into a head chef position and it not being what they expected. With your team, do you sort of formalise the business training when you take somebody under the Roux wing? Is that part of their development?
Well, I suppose it's we tend to promote from within. So if you take, for example, Rachel, who's our executive chef, she started as an apprentice many moons ago, and then she did her apprenticeship and extended it, so stayed 4 years, and then decided to move on, which was a good thing, and with our blessing moved on, and then came back after a few more years and said, look, she looked me in the eye and said, chef, one day I want to be head chef here, the first female head chef of Le Gavroche, and so she worked her way up to it. And so within that period, yes, you have to learn how to structure a menu, the costings, the balance of the menu as well, because you might have some items on the menu that are really good sellers and are bringing in a really good GP, and other items that are not quite selling as much, but less of a GP. So you have to balance the menu in that respect as well. And we share the figures at the end of the month. We go through them and all of that. So it is important. And we set each other targets as well. So I set them little targets. I set them and front of house as well targets. So we work together, and we know that what the business needs financially to survive.
Okay, so it's a tough sector business. It's tight margin. Maths is just one aspect of it. What do you think? With all these hundreds of moving parts and tiny margins, what do you think the hardest aspect of running a restaurant is in your experience?
Gosh,
is there a list?
Yeah, where do I start? I mean, you would know, but I think ultimately it's the experience of the diner. It's not it's not all about the food. And I think that's where a lot of chefs get it wrong. That they cook for their own ego almost, and then they get upset if the customers don't like it. You've got to be much more open-minded than that, and you've got to make a successful business, because if you don't have a successful business, you won't have a restaurant, let alone a kitchen to cook in. So it's an experience. You have to look at it as if you were the customer, the guest coming into the restaurant. Would you feel at ease? Would you like the welcome? Would you like the tables, every single one? I sit at every single table in the restaurant at Le Gavroche, and I still do now, even though the layout hasn't changed. But occasionally I'll just sit down and I'll look, and I'll look at the perspective and what does the customer see sat at this table. And that's important. All of the little things that you wouldn't think are important are probably the most important things.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Just sitting there, because for me, so much of a restaurant is how it feels. I think it's very much the art of the restaurateur, not the science of the restaurateur. And as you were talking, then I was having flashbacks to so many conversations. I think I'm year 16 in this industry, and the number of times I've had to sit with a chef and go, absolutely, the food is important, but it's not everything. It's the candles, it's the music, it's the welcome, it's even the website. It's everything that's involved in it. I remember having a chat with Michael Bremner, chef down in Brighton, and he set up his own restaurant, and again, it was in his head, it was all about the food, to the extreme where he forgot to put a bar in, and it wasn't until they opened that he realised that he'd so focused on the food, he'd actually had to retrofit a bar so there was somewhere to actually pour the wine and the drinks. So chefs can take it to extremes sometimes.
Oh yeah.
So my restaurant manager is French. His name is Olivier. He's worked with me for over 10 years. I think he's 50 years old. He's lived in England for 30 years, so longer in England than he's lived in France.
Mm.
He is the most French-sounding human being that I know. I can almost not understand him. How do you manage to be so French and so English at the same time? Where it's a pretty lucky phenomenon that you've got, I think, in your trade. Or maybe not luck. Did you work on that?
No, well, I was born here. My father and mother arrived in England in 1958. So yeah, I was born here. My first language as a child was definitely French because my parents were still learning English, and so that yeah, very very French. In fact, my first school in Kent, I struggled as a very very young child because my English was awful and I could barely speak a word. But then, following that, all my schooling was in English school. So obviously, I spoke perfect English and with a slight South London accent. And so it is different. Whereas my cousin Alain still has a very strong French accent because he went to the French lycée and then went to France as well as a young teenager. But no, I am fluent in French and in English.
Yeah. Well, it always amazes me that most French people you speak to have such a strong accent, even after so many years. But next time Olivier's having a rant at me and I start to look a little bit blank because I lose track of what he's saying, I'm going to say, look, Michel can do it. Come on, Olivier, we can do this. But I think he's probably given up after 30 years. So
Yeah, there's
go on.
also a little bit of a charm there as well, isn't there? Really?
He could sell, ice to Eskimos. He sounds beautiful. I think, like he's by far the best person to go out and sell a lovely bottle of red to a table of ladies. It doesn't matter what he says; they just say yes, thank you. So he's perfect. You took over Le Gavroche back in 1991, but you were there earlier than that. I was kind of imagining maybe the frustration of you sort of sitting on your hands or biting your lip, and was it sort of, were you desperate to get involved and make some changes because you could see what you wanted to do? And I suppose, do you remember that first night on the pass? Was there a sort of a life event change where all of a sudden it was your name above the door rather than your dad's, or actually did it feel much more transitionary and less of a life event than that?
Yeah, I mean, it was more of a transition because I was back at the restaurant, back at Le Gavroche. I think it was in '88, maybe actually it might have even been '87, and officially took over in '91. But yeah, I mean, for those 3 or 4 years before '91, yeah, Dad was just popping in every now and then. Just he wasn't really running the restaurant at all. So it was already my kind of well, yeah, I was the head chef, but doing my father's cooking, and gosh, yeah, there were certain things which were really annoying me, and and we used to bicker, and he used to give me earfuls, and I used to give him earfuls back, and it was fraught at times, but it was all good because whether it was his dish or my dish, it was we agreed that they were both very very good, except his were better.
Was there ever a specific dish that you remember that you were like, my goodness, I battled for that for months and still didn't win? Or?
No, there were some which I just hated and want on his menu, and I wanted them off. And he said, "No, this one will not come off. We want this one." Yeah. But no, at the end of the day, if my old man annoyed me too much, I'd just slip a little bit of coriander in his food, and he would really get wound up.
Was that was the technique?
Oh yeah. If you really annoyed me, I'd slip coriander in something. How dare you put coriander on the menu? I hate it. I said, well, yeah, but I love it.
Oh, I can imagine the battles. So, not just the sort of there was a transform, not a transformation, a transition, like you say, over the time from his style of cooking to yours. But actually, if you look back over the last 30 years, I guess the whole cooking, sort of sector in the country has changed. But if you look at Le Gavroche specifically, again, has it just been a sort of slow evolution, or if you look back over that period, are there a few sort of key pivotal points where there were some bigger changes?
Yeah, I think no, it's been a smooth and sort of gentle transition. Let's not forget, I am very still very French, even though I don't sound it. And I was brought up on the great French classics, and I was taught the great French classic techniques, and that's what I love. So that's where that for me that's comfort. That's comfort food, and that's what I like to love to eat. And I think it's great food. French food with great wines is just perfect. So that will always be. What is served at Le Gavroche. So over the years, yes, it's got lighter. So we don't use as much heavy sauces, thickened sauces. There are more emphasis on emulsions, slightly different cooking techniques as well. Although I'm not a huge fan of vacuum pack sous vide cooking. So there are lots of ways that we have kind of evolved, but that's normal. And then if Emily was in this conversation, she would say, well, Dad, your cooking style is really old fashioned. And as for Grandad's, it was, dinosaur. But she is also very French and loves the classics, loves butter and cream and such like. But she has got the next generation's sort of style. So it's recognizable as Roux, it's recognizable as Gavroche, recognizable as French classic. But it's just evolved slightly, just to today's palate, which is normal.
Mm. Does Emily have a coriander equivalent that she can put in your dish if you get really irritating, Michel? Oh, you're not going to admit it because she doesn't know yet.
I'm not told her, but no, she loves coriander too. Actually, she loves coriander.
Oh, really? Okay. The whole sort of Michelin star thing, and your family, incredible reputation for the standards that you've maintained. Do you find that constrictive sometimes in perhaps wanting to be more experimental? And do you constantly have to, as you're coming up with new dishes, do you sort of have to consider its impact on stars, or actually is a good dish that you and the customers love also good enough for Michelin?
I think if it's good enough for your guests, then it should be good enough for any guide, Michelin guide, good food guide, or food bloggers or whatever. So if your customers come back time and time again and reorder that same dish because they love it, then it should be good enough for to make your mark. That's. I think that's what you should go by. You should never cook for stars. You should never cook for the Michelin guide or any guide. You should cook for your customers and cook for your pleasure as well. And if you do that, then you'll get it right and you'll get the plaudits afterwards. That's the way I see it.
Mm. It's been interesting. It seems to have been less so maybe in the last few years, but certainly 10 years ago, I found it really difficult to recruit any chef that didn't have sort of grand ambitions and want external accreditation and some really challenging conversations at times to say, look, first and foremost, I have to sell, what the customer enjoys and what they want, and we have to be a viable business. And I'd often say, look, the specials menu is where you can play and have as much fun as you want, but fundamentally, I've still got to have a steak and a salad on the menu. How have you managed, or how should people manage the ego, I suppose, of chefs and find that balance, as we said before, I suppose, the art of the restaurateur and the difference between a chef?
Yeah, that is somehow challenging. But you're absolutely right. You mentioned the daily specials, and that is something that we do use. And so the a la carte is sacrosanct. I will have 100% input on that. And there are certain dishes which I don't want to change. And I do feel that they have to be there. They're almost like the pillars or the foundations. But then the specials, yes, you can have a bit of fun with that. And that's where your head chef can maybe show off a little bit and you discuss them with your chef and you try them and trial them maybe and gauge the response. And then maybe tweak it, and then ultimately that can maybe then go on to the full a la carte, which should be the holy grail for your head chef. And you say, "Wow, look, I've actually managed to get one of my dishes onto the a la carte," which is that's the way I think it should work anyway.
Perfect. Okay. Well, that was always my sort of get out of jail card, so to speak. Every time I see you interviewed, we're obviously very lucky we get to see you on the TV, and you just come across as a really genuinely nice guy, generally got a big smile on your face, a little glint in your eye. You seem like a very happy chap. Yet you've come through an era of sort of kitchen culture. I think of, the Ramsays and maybe the Marcos, and this general perception of kitchens being quite hot-headed and being quite angry. I actually phoned Steve Groves, who I know because he used to live in Bournemouth, one of your chefs, yesterday, because I thought, I'm going to just find out, is it true? Is Michel genuinely a nice guy, or actually, when the cameras are off, is he an angry man? And he couldn't have been more complimentary about you. He said you were genuinely a really decent guy, which was quite a relief for me because I didn't want to be sworn at for an hour. What's your experience of that era, I suppose, of kitchen cultures? Have you changed? Did you witness the sort of culture that we have a bad reputation for? And do you think it is finally changing?
Well, first off, I think I should return the compliment to Steve Groves.
I don't do that; he'll get big-headed.
No, Steve is an amazing chef, an immensely talented young man, and he's special. He really is special. Very, very level-headed as well.
He's super calm, isn't he? Ice cool.
Absolutely, God, yeah. I always look and try and find positives, and that's so important. And that's not just in the kitchen; it's in life in general. It's not easy. Kitchens can get very, very hot and like pressure cookers. Do I ever lose my rag? Do I ever swear? Yes, of course I do. and but it's important to lose your rag at the right time and to not dwell on it. If something goes wrong, then you have to find out why it went wrong. I tend to blame myself if I shout and scream, and if something goes wrong, I blame myself because I think, well, hang on, why did that go wrong? I should have been in total control, or I should have shown this person what to do, or I take the blame, and it annoys me immensely. But I also find that if the kitchen is shouting and screaming and there's less control, and if you lose control, then ultimately the food is not going to be right. So it is difficult, and kitchens are a sort of a pressurized atmosphere because everybody is fighting for perfection and to get everything right, and timing is so essential too. So when you've got a brigade of chefs and they're all trying to get everything together for one specific time, it's not easy. It really isn't easy. But I went through, yes, a shouty time, I suppose, when Gordon was in the kitchen as well with me at Gavroche, and there was definitely a lot more shouting and swearing 30 years ago. But we've moved on from there, and I think that's for the better.
Yeah, okay. An amusing thoughts of imagining you two in the kitchen. You just seem so different. I can't imagine you sort of calmly putting him down and him having a rant. But,
I mean, Gordon 30 years ago was a shouty, shouty chef, and swearing. Every other word was swearing. I mean, he's always been like that. He used to just say, "All right, that's it. Calm down. Service. Let's get on with it." And he would, for me, Gordon is one of the most talented, in fact, the most talented chef, naturally talented chef I've seen at Gavroche, for sure, bar none. Unbelievable natural talent. But fiery, yeah. But
they certainly don't seem to use the bleeper machine on the telly with you as much as they need to use it with Gordon, Michel. You mentioned then sort of that sort of stress of the kitchen, I suppose, and when you think about, I think it's phenomenal. I heard you chatting in another interview about sort of people who've not worked in kitchens, and actually when they come in and they observe how it works and the different sections, and everybody's called chef and everybody's talking to each other, and there's an amazing energy and buzz and vibe, and do you still get to do a sort of a busy stressy night, a Saturday night on the pass, or if not, do you miss that energy, or do you just every now and again almost have to go and have your fix, I suppose, and go, right, I've got to do this again because I really want to feel that energy sort of surging through my veins?
Yeah, no, I'm at the restaurant most days, lunch and dinner, which our guests are always always taken aback when they see me. They go, "You're here on a Saturday night. Thought you'd have your feet up." I said, "Well, it's my name on the door, and I actually do enjoy coming in and being there." I don't cook at the stove anymore. I do the odd occasion. I'll cook the odd cheese soufflé, the odd soufflé suissesse, and I'll do a little bit here and there. Um, but no, I'm not behind the stoves. And I quite honestly, I do a little bit on the pass, but not that much. But I'm actually on the pass, but on the waiter side, and I'm helping them, and I'm measuring times, and keeping an eye out on the quality, and having a little taste, and putting my finger in the sauce, metaphorically. So I'm there, and I just enjoy it. I enjoy the buzz, the atmosphere, the watching all the young chefs, working their backsides off to get, to deliver the food beautifully, and it's just wonderful. I just thoroughly enjoy it, and enjoy the buzz, the atmosphere, the beautiful produce, the end product, and then going out and meeting and greeting all the guests, and having a quick chat with everybody, and wishing them happy birthday, or it's just that experience, and I think we talk about experiences of a diner, but you have to make that experience, and you have to make that memory for the diner. It's, as I said earlier, it's not just the plate of food. Yes, that can be memorable, but that memory is just taste and visual. But the experience is more in the soul, and it's an aura that's in the restaurant, and that's created by the front of house and the kitchen as well, and the boss. It's simple.
Yeah, I don't know if it's simple, but it's beautiful when it works, and like I say, it's back to that feeling, isn't it? And you just know the music is the right level, the background chat is the right level. It just feels good. But you mentioned then that sort of, I suppose, the contradiction between the pros and the cons. So Saturday night being at work, I know I've heard you talk before about the sacrifices you had to make from a family perspective. We're very much aware, if we work in this sector, it's almost like a drug. We love it but hate it, almost an equal measure, because sometimes the sort of balance that it forces us to make. What was your thoughts as it became clear that Emily wanted to get into the restaurant world? As a dad, was your gut preference that perhaps she would have a better quality of life exploring something else, or were you always sort of very encouraging and saying, no, go for it?
Well, we certainly didn't push Emily into the industry, but at a very, very young age, she wanted to be a chef, and said that. My wife tried to dissuade her, and she worked in the industry as well, my wife, and still does. But said to her, look, you also love art and photography. Maybe you could become a photographer and specialize in food photography, or there's food journalism, there's lots of other things, or maybe front of house as opposed to in the kitchen. And but no, she was adamant, and she was, no, that is what I want to do, and that is what I'm going to do. When I, and she repeated it and said, this is my decision. I want to go to hotel catering school, and I want to qualify as a chef, and I want to work in kitchens. And she is. She's a very stubborn young lady, and she knows what she wants, and that's good. That's very, very good.
Does it make you feel proud now that she's doing it?
Oh, good Lord, yes, absolutely. Proud, but very. Gosh, it was difficult, because there were times. I remember when we were going to visit her when she was working in Monaco, or working in Paris, and she'd look absolutely knackered. Black sort of around the eyes, and burns up and down her arm, no nails, and think, oh my God, what have I done to my poor daughter? But when you'd speak to her, and she'd talk about what she was cooking that day, and what she'd cooked, and what she learned, and all of that, and you think, wow, this is amazing, that she's 100% immersed in being a chef, and then she got headhunted as well for another restaurant, and I think, wow, look at that, isn't that amazing? Somebody in another restaurant has offered her a job, and obviously knows about her. And that's great. That's fantastic. Very, very proud.
Yeah, you can't see the grin on my face, but with an 11-year-old daughter and sort of wondering what she's going to do in the future, it's I can imagine how exciting that must be. Do you get invited over to Susie now opened her own restaurant? Do you get invited for lunch, and are you very conscious of? I suppose, are you allowed to make comment? It's like walking on eggshells. My daughter loves baking, and trying to give us some feedback is incredibly challenging. You had that experience with your dad. Do you try and manage it in a very different way? Are you allowed to pass comment, or do you just keep your mouth shut and enjoy your lunch?
Well, to be honest, I've always enjoyed lunch at her restaurant, and Diego as well. Her husband is an amazing chef. I mean, absolutely, so talented. It's unbelievable. So they make a great team. Yeah, I've never had any cause to complain or pass comment. It's just exceptional. And I feel immensely proud when I go and eat there and I taste their food and see their restaurant, because it really is it's a wonderful, wonderful place, and they were doing so well until this bloody pandemic arrived.
Yeah, incredibly tough time. We're going to come on to that very shortly, actually, and about how to navigate through this. But just quickly, so one of the motivations for me setting up this podcast, funny enough, was actually France. I drove through the night once to go and do some cycling in the mountains, and I got to a little village, Bourg de Son, at the base of the mountains, and we'd driven all night. We went into this little boulangerie and ordered an espresso and a croissant. It was about 7:30 in the morning, and ordered another coffee, and I looked out over the square, and there was probably 4 or 5 other boulangeries, and there was this amazing sort of culinary atmosphere, I suppose, and the French coming in and chatting and buying their French bread, and it was beautiful to see. And all I could think about was, why at home were people, probably popping into a BP garage and pressing a button on a Costa machine and getting their coffee and buying a vac-packed patisserie, or we couldn't even call it that, some bit of slime. And it was frustrating. So I wanted people to understand sort of, the work and the energy, I guess, that goes in behind the scenes, and hopefully get them to choose differently. Am I right in saying it never feels like, when I'm traveling around Europe, it never feels like they have that same thing? They don't have those sort of chains of casual restaurants in the same way that we do here. Is that fair, or am I just not seeing them, or is it very different?
Yeah, you're probably not seeing them. There has been an onslaught in France of the chains and the fast food chains. And much to my chagrin, anyway, I think it's terrible. But yeah, it is. Yeah, it is bad. It is. Although saying that, I must say that in recent years, I would say in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, there's been an onslaught of these sort of chain restaurants, fast food outlets. But there's also been a renaissance in bakers, so small boulangers, who are fighting back and are doing the traditional baguette and the traditional sourdough of yesteryear, and great croissants cooked almost to order. And that is really, really nice. Also, cheesemongers as well, and all of the little shops that we kind of associate, or used to associate, with little villages in France, that sadly went bust with the onslaught of these mega supermarkets that have sprung up everywhere. But they're now fighting back. So that's really nice. I mean, where I live in France, there's quite a few examples of that, which is great.
That's good. We've actually got a couple of local bakeries and even a cheese shop open near me, and it's beautiful to see. And actually, the pandemic has been a blessing for them, because all of a sudden people are staying out of the supermarkets and supporting them. So it is good. I interviewed Guy from Riverford Organics a few months ago, and I think he made a good point that it was almost like things are getting better and worse at the same time, and we just get further apart. Has anybody ever turned up with a sort of a very big bucket of cash and said, Michel Roux, can we put your name above the door of our 100 restaurants across the UK?
A rollout of Le Gavroche.
Or maybe under a slightly different name.
Yeah, well Le Gavroche is definitely not rolled out. And that, yes, I have been tempted to open a Le Gavroche in various other places, well, all over the world actually, and there's been a lot of money on offer. But I've always declined. Le Gavroche will remain unique, and will remain, the one and only. Other Roux restaurants, yeah, of course, definitely. But it will not be Le Gavroche. So that I think is important, and that's what makes Le Gavroche special, and makes it iconic and a worldwide known brand. So that's important.
Yeah. So the other thing we've seen a big sort of growth off in the UK, and I think it's quite interesting and quite often a sort of a cheaper way, as the big brands have started to dominate and every high street looks the same, it's become prohibitively expensive, I guess, for people to get in and open independent restaurants. So there's been this huge sort of growth in street food and people getting carts and, thinking of the various markets up in London. Is that the same in France? Is there a sort of similar growth in street food, or has it remained more traditional?
No, very much street food. They've cottoned on to this, and come a little late to the party, but they've definitely embraced it. There are great street food areas and markets that have food. I would say food markets. France have always had food markets, but by that I mean like street food markets. So trucks and selling food from different regions and different parts of the world, very eclectic, but yeah, and they're places where people come to congregate. Although now it's difficult, but and there are things like what's it called, Box Park, or in Brixton, there's old containers that have been made into small bars and restaurants. So there's lots of those that have popped up in France, and especially in the suburbs of Lyon and Marseille. So that has taken off, and that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, no, it's been exciting, I think, to see some of the food that's come out of it. Even Mark Hicks, through this process, he lost his restaurants and ended up back in a food truck on the south coast. Could you see a Michel Roux food truck in your semi-retirement years, Michel? Or?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
I would love to see that. If you drove down my street, I'd be running down the road.
Something based on maybe the croque monsieur, but with all kinds of different fillings and different ways of cooking them. But use the croque monsieur as a vehicle. Have you?
Yeah.
Talking of which, have you seen Sat Baines has launched Mama Baines?
Really? No, I've not seen that.
Oh my! So he's got his little food truck as well.
Really?
But he also does delivery service of his mum's great curries and samosas. I had a delivery of that, and that is absolutely mind-blowingly good. So it's even a Michelin-starred chef can have a food truck, and but different because it's Indian. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I love that. Somebody said to me the other day, it's like, when the ice cream vans used to come down your road and ring the bell, why doesn't somebody have a food truck that comes down your street at lunchtime, especially at the moment when everybody's working from home, and literally, rings a little siren and everybody piles out and buys their lunch. So if anybody's listening and has got time for a new business idea, I'd love to see, knowing a few trucks were coming down your street on a regular basis. It'd be fantastic, particularly if you or Sat was in them, to be fair. But, I want to touch a little bit on our sort of responsibilities as restaurateurs. I always think that, if I get on a plane, I expect the pilot to know, a hell of a lot about how to fly a plane, and I don't need to know that. And I sort of feel the same in restaurants and in food and drink. And I feel this sort of sense of responsibility, but it's tricky because at the end of the day, we need to run restaurants where people buy produce and we make a profit. But I also feel that we should be helping educate people around food and drink, and by which I mean, where it comes from and the impact that it's having on the planet, but also the impact it's having on our bodies. That we've clearly got one of the biggest obesity problems in the world. I didn't go into my career to make people unhealthy or to make people fatter. How do you feel what do you feel our level of responsibility is? Is it down to us as restaurateurs to sort of hold people's hands and take them on the journey and say, look, this is the impact of what you're buying on the planet's health and on your own health?
That's a difficult question because people go to restaurants to fill their tummies, but also to enjoy the experience and have a good time. If we start saying to them, well, you can't have that dessert, well, you can't have that starter, that main, and that dessert because you're going to be consuming X amount of calories and far too much fat for your health, then that's just wrong. So I think we have a responsibility as chefs to source our produce. And when I say chefs, I mean restaurateurs or chefs of any restaurant, not Michelin star or anything. As soon as you are a chef, you have your responsibility to purchase the best produce and to know where that produce comes from and the impact of that produce. So if it's possible to buy locally, if it's possible to buy green, if it's possible, all of that, and sustainable as well. So that's the personal responsibility. I don't think that we should be imposed upon to do calorie counting and to put lists of where all the food comes from and such like. I don't think that's right.
It feels like the government often get the sort of the wrong idea, don't they? Specifically around calories on menus, I suppose. It feels like everything just ends up being centrally made in a factory. If every single ingredient and every process has got to be the same every single time, the complexity of having a specials board and working out the nutrition information and the calories on a special that the chef might have tasted and tweaked a little bit just before service because it needed a little bit of love. Are you concerned that if the government start to over-regulate, that it will almost be impossible to be our trade? And do they perhaps just not understand how a proper restaurant could work? Because it feels like the wrong solution. We should be eating whole food, fresh food that's made by real humans, not by robots.
No, indeed. And that's where I think if we can get a minister for hospitality, that would help. And that minister has to have a proper understanding of how the industry works. Because we would not be able to calorie count and measure all of our food in a busy restaurant like ours. That would just not work. And it just goes against the whole ethos of hospitality and eating out in a restaurant. It's about indulgence and about enjoyment. And you don't want to feel guilty if you're ordering a chocolate mousse and it's, a couple of 100 calories more than you should have. No, you're not going to be eating that chocolate mousse every day. You're going there because you want to indulge. And that's so important, I think.
Oh my goodness, your cheese souffle, Michel, which I know you've probably had enough of over the years, but just I did some research in the last couple of days before we had a chat, and the number of times I think I even heard you cooking it live once, describing it, and oh my goodness, I was salivating. But yeah, it sounds like a week's worth of calories, but it sounds absolutely delicious. So yeah, we don't want to stop people eating those occasionally, do we?
Well, exactly. That's just the thing. You're not going to be eating one of those souffle suissettes, every day of the week. It's a treat, and we can't take that away from eating out, and it's enjoyment.
Yeah. So the challenge then, I absolutely agree on the sustainability angle. I think that is our responsibility. I think there's challenges around getting people to understand where food comes from and to be willing to pay a little bit more. But this problem that we've got as an obese nation, and maybe our relationship with food, certainly our perception is that it's different in the Mediterranean. You hear about the Mediterranean diet. We look at perhaps the sort of the family social occasion around food, maybe long lunches. Our perception is certainly that Europeans have a different relationship with food. Do you think that's true or false? And is it a case of, how do we resolve this in the UK? Do we need to go back to schools? Is this a cultural issue, and what's the answer? Because ignoring it clearly means we're on the same trajectory as the USA.
Absolutely. Well, knowledge is key for me. So knowledge about food, what it does to your body, what you need as well, and how to cook. But when I say how to cook, I mean just the basics, the very, very basics. And that for me is key. Knowledge is key. And so we should be teaching our children the basics at a very, very young age. Where our food comes from, calories, what are they, how different calories are, because there are so many different kinds of calories, and then how to cook. Basic cooking, just very, very simple. Just teach them 10 basic recipes, and that's food for life.
Yeah. So have you seen any good examples? I had Naomi Duncan from Chefs in Schools on the podcast a few weeks ago, chatting about them trying to get sort of, proper food, not even necessarily proper chefs, because quite often schools have got chefs and they want to, they don't want to open a packet and heat it up. We just want them to use, real whole foods. In your journey, have you seen any sort of transformational approaches or places where we can go and go, look, there's a really good template. Let's pick that up, because it seems that, Jamie's obviously looked into this. The government, I know Henry Dimbleby's now looking at the sort of, the country's food sourcing and culture a little bit. It's this eternal problem. Have you seen anything where you go, yes, that's a great approach, that might help?
Oh gosh, I mean that's difficult, and of course, school lunches at the moment is a bit of a hot potato, isn't it? But I remember visiting the French Lycée here in London twice, the canteen, and although it's well, there are fees, so it's a fee paying, but it is state subsidised. So the canteen there, the food was prepared fresh every day by chefs, and the food there was really good. It was wholesome food for the children. Nothing. I mean, it wasn't expensive and it wasn't fancy, but it was just good, fresh food. There was always fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, salads, cold meats, and then there was always a hot dish, including a vegetarian dish with fresh vegetables, and a cheese. Very French, isn't it? There's always got to be cheese.
Little charcuterie board for lunch at school, lovely.
And fruit again, and a sweet, but it was never a very, very sickly, horrible sweet. And there were never any confectionery, no confectionery or sweet drinks. And I think that's important. And I think nowadays too many children have just grab what there is. So a bag of crisps, some overly sweet confectionery, and that makes part of their lunch. Fizzy drinks, whatever, and that's where I think knowledge is key. That if we can get into the minds of these children at the youngest possible age of what they are putting into their tummies and how it will affect them, then that's important, and get them to really enjoy it. I mean, my dad was up until quite recently going into schools with Adopt a School, the charity, and teaching kids about different tastes, tasting different fruit, different vegetables, and how good they are, and and doing just very, very, very simple cooking lessons, how to cook an omelette and what you can put in an omelette, and then there would be a further lesson of the calories and everything to go with that. But I think that's key, definitely.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. We did a project recently with a school, and the teacher said, look, it was the most engaged they'd seen the kids. They had to come in and come up with some dishes and do some baking and show us something a little bit sort of bake-off style. So the kids like it. Clearly the demand and the need is there. They're much more excited that when a restaurateur or a chef comes in than probably when an accountant or a estate agent comes in. I guess it's a case of getting it recognised, on the national curriculum and starting early. And I don't know why it's taken so long, but we haven't got time to fix that today, Michel. But talking of that impact on the planet and the sustainability side, I suppose, of what we purchase, do you tend to focus on things like organic or Marine Stewardship Council, that sort of external accreditation, or do you think that buying sustainably is more nuanced than that?
Gosh, I think to be fair, I'm going to sit on the fence on that one. I think it's a bit of both. We have a personal responsibility, and that's very important. But also, we need help by following these guidelines and following the accreditations, and that's very important too. I find that working with smaller suppliers as well is often the easier way to get directly to the producer. So the smaller the supplier, the quicker you will get to the connection with the actual grower, or with the actual farmer, or with the actual fisherman, and that's key as well.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience. I think if you can look your supplier in the eye
Mm.
and and shake their hand and trust what they say, then I think quite often the complexities of it, so especially for sometimes the external sort of accreditation be quite an expensive process with a few hoops to jump through, and it doesn't apply to some of the smaller suppliers. But I think being able to look people in the eye is important.
Mm.
Conscious of time, but I just want to touch on the pandemic and obviously incredibly tough times. How are you coping, sort of professionally, personally, with the pandemic? What's the impact been? The sort of closure at Roux at Parliament Square, was that the pandemic's fault? How's it going your end?
Yeah, Roux at Parliament Square. Well, I mean, it's very, very difficult and hard to swallow. But uh, the, the business structure at Roux at Parliament Square was the restaurant one side, 40 cover, which in good years would break even, and we were happy with that. But obviously, with the pandemic, that sort of really did hurt. But what hurt the most was the event side of that business, because there was also an event side where we would do weddings and big receptions of 100 or so people sat down, and that was where the money was made, and that's where the profit came. And there's been no events last year at all, and we can't see events coming back online this year, not until maybe the end of the year. So unfortunately, we had to take the decision to cut our losses there and close Parliament Square, Roux at Parliament Square, which is incredibly sad because, as I mentioned earlier, Steve Groves is an incredibly talented chef, and we're keeping Steve busy, and we've got work for him, and I'm still going to be working with Steve, which is great, and some of the sous chefs as well. We've managed to get jobs for them, and front of house too. But it is incredibly difficult. For Gavroche, well, yeah, it's tough. It really is. Lockdown 1 was just manic, crazy. Lockdown 2, we knew what to expect, and this latest one, I think that the problem with this one is that we don't know when we're going to get out of it, and yeah, I've done a lot of virtual cook along, which is good. It keeps me busy, and it's a little bit of income coming into the business, because we need a trickle of income. We need something, because there are so many fixed costs and outgoings that have to be paid. And then we dabbled in the delivery of food boxes, which was an incredible amount of work. I mean, a truly huge amount of work for next to nothing return. So people who say, "Well, just do takeaway," it's not that easy. It's not that simple. It can and can't. It can work, yes, but it doesn't pay the bills. Not entirely, anyway. So
No.
yeah, there's lots. I've launched an e-shop. Now that's been really good. That's saved a couple of jobs, which is great. So yeah, and then we're looking to do maybe something for Valentine's coming up in a month's time or so. So doing something special through the e-shop. So maybe food related, champagne related. So yeah, there are things that you can do to try and just at least get a trickle of money coming into the businesses.
Yeah, we very much share that experience. We did more in the first sort of lockdown, but the lack of viability of some of the stuff. We were doing drive-through food collections, deliveries. Very much this time, more about battening down the hatches. I think certain restaurants and certain styles of food probably lend themselves to delivery easier, but it is really, really tough. But still wanting to stay relevant, saying we're going to do something for Valentine's night. We won't make any money out of it, but it gives the team a project to focus on, and hopefully it just keeps us in the mind eye of the customers. But
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's important too. It's just to keep it out there, to keep ticking over, and to keep your staff motivated and feel as if they are still relevant and useful. And that's so important, because I really do fear for mental health as well, because sat at home doing nothing is soul destroying. It really, really is. So you've got to keep motivated and you've got to keep doing something.
Mm. Where do you think the sort of impact of this, I'm still not sure the government get it, and we'll come on to it, maybe support, but it's been pretty heartbreaking to see just the number of restaurants that appear to be, closing for good, not just the pandemic. What's your experience of the level of pain out there in the industry, and how do you see this playing out? Do you think it's the big guys, with the shareholders that are going to get through, or do you think it's the more nimble independents? Where's your sort of level of fear as to how many people perhaps aren't going to come out of this, and who's it going to be?
I think, well, we've lost many, and there's a lot more that sadly will go under. I think you're absolutely right in saying that the smaller independent and nimble ones could survive a bit longer, but then again, it all depends on the landlords. If you've got a really good landlord who's understanding, then and your restaurant is in an area maybe in the suburbs, then where rents are slightly less, then you've got more of a chance of survival. And then you've got the big guys, and we know who they are, the big guys with a big shareholding and big, deep pockets. They will survive. And then you've got the sharks that are out there that are lapping up and already starting to buy up places and buy up businesses, because there's businesses that are going bust and that are going for a song. So some people will make money out of this, and others will be forever in debt, and that's so sad, so sad. And it's not
Yeah.
restaurants. Let's not just say, this is the hospitality industry as a whole. So it's all our suppliers as well, and they are on their knees. This is this. Oh, it is awful. It's an awful, awful time that we're all going through.
You're right. It is genuinely heartbreaking to hear some of the stories. So if you were sat in a meeting with Boris and Rishi, what would you be telling them? What would you be asking them for? What sort of help do you think we need, not just for your business, but for the sort of the wider sector to help us bounce back out of this as soon as possible?
Well, VAT to remain at 5% for at least 2021. Business rates, again, for the whole of the year. That would be an immense help. I would also look at the furlough as well, because it's all good and proper paying furlough, but the businesses have to pay for pensions and other taxes when we're not actually employing these people are not working. So it might seem trivial and small, but it does add up. So I really don't understand why the businesses have to pay on top of that. And that's just not right. The grants are not even touching the sides. I think we have to be very careful what we say, because the government is doing, I think, a lot. Could they do better? Yes, I definitely think they could do better. You just have to look how they've operated in France and in Germany, for example, whereby they are taking a percentage of the business's turnover and paying that, and paying furlough. There's definitely a lot more we can do, because otherwise we're not going to get out of this, and there's not going to be many restaurants or pubs or hotels or bars for people to enjoy when we do get out of this.
Well, we're sort of supposed to be one of the big three economies, aren't we, with France and Germany? And it keeps getting wheeled out what they're doing. It's the same in rents. They seem to have a sort of tax relief for landlords so that there's this shared burden. We just seem to keep kicking the can down the road with this moratorium. Why do you think that Britain isn't, up there with France and Germany in its support?
I think it should be a shared burden. You're absolutely right. And then don't get me started on insurance as well. In France, the insurance operators are now being bullied and shamed by the restaurateurs and hoteliers and the government to cough up. Now, I think the way the insurance companies have looked at us, the hospitality industry, is shameful, absolutely shameful. How can they look at themselves in the mirror in the morning? I do not know. I had business interruption clearly on my policy, and they have just ignored it and hidden behind absolutely pitiful excuses that my policy is not fit. Well, I'm going to fight this, and like a lot of restaurateurs, it's shameful. The way that they're being treated is shameful.
Yeah, it's a mess, and there's enough traumas in trying to get through this without those additional hassles. I want to concentrate just very briefly to finish off. We can't finish on a downer, Michel. We've got to look at the future, and hopefully there's some cheer. One thing that's definitely cheerful is you've been back on the telly, back on the BBC again, which has been great over Christmas. You famously fell out with them back in 2014 over the fact that Gary Lineker was the only host allowed to advertise potatoes. I say that slightly tongue in cheek. Evidently, you didn't burn your bridges, or have the people that you fell out with at that time gone? How come you're back on the telly?
No, I fell out, or we fell out, but I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't that bad. I absolutely, am very, very proud and love everything I've done with the BBC, and hopefully they feel the same. Which actually I know they feel the same. They have changed their stance slightly, and a little bit more receptive to talent, as they call it, or people that they employ in making money out of their name. But it's I've worked for the BBC since, and there's even a couple of projects maybe in the pipeline. If we get out of this pandemic soon, then I will do some more stuff with them. It's silly. It was a bust up over something silly.
Yeah. Well, we're all glad that you didn't burn the bridges too bad and throw too many things at them, because it's great. You come across so well. Just looking then, last thing, so many years you've been doing this, you've been in the sector. I'm interested, I suppose, in what motivates you. And you're 60 now. If you look at maybe your 70th birthday, so look in 10 years' time, and you're looking back into the last decade, what would put a big grin on your face? Are there some sort of particular things that you would love to achieve in the next 10 years that you can look back on and raise a glass on your 70th?
Yeah, well, wow. Well, I'm immensely proud of my daughter and my son-in-law. So to see them achieve what they've achieved so far, I would love to see them get out of this pandemic and survive and do well. For me at Le Gavroche, I've been around a long time, and if everything really does go pear-shaped and I have to say, look, we're not going to reopen, or things just stop, I've had a good time, but I want to see the next generation do well, and that's so important for me, to see the next generation do well. And I'm blessed in many regards. My daughter's had a little bouncy boy, so I'm a grandfather now, and that gives me so much joy. So in 10 years' time, hopefully, I can take him to a football match, and we can go and watch a live game with all the crowd and have a good time. That's what I want to do in 10 years' time.
Perfect. Well, that's true hospitality, isn't it? It's not about things, it's about spending time with people, which is what it's all about, particularly with your family. Thank you so much for being very generous with your time and coming on, having a chat. I've really enjoyed it. If people want to follow your adventures and see what you're up to, is there a particular website or social media channel that you use more than others, Michel?
Well, yes, I am on Twitter, and it is me. It's 100% me. It's not somebody else. So yeah, Michel Roux. And we do Instagram as well, Le Gavroche Instagram. And of course, the website and the e-shop is always good fun to look out for stuff to buy and what we do. There you go.
Perfect. Well, I will put links up to all of those in the show notes that go with this episode. But best of luck navigating the rest of this pandemic, and hopefully we get to meet in person at some point on the other side of this. But thanks so much, Michel.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
Okay, there we have it. Thanks again to Michel for taking part in the podcast, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. If you did, please do me a favour. Can you go to the website, send me a message? It's always lovely to hear from you. There's a simple contact form on there, and a 5-star rating on your podcast player of choice really helps me continue to motivate guests to come on the show. So that is a win-win for both of us. I will put up links as discussed in the show notes to Michel's online shop and his social media channels on the humansofhospitality.co.uk website. Just head to the episodes page or type Roux in the search bar and those notes will appear. Or, to make it even easier, why not sign up for my weekly newsletter where every Monday you will then get a short and sharp email reminding you about that week's guest with links to anything useful right in your inbox. No spam, just me. Again, easy to do on the sign up form at the bottom of the homepage of the website. Okay, that's it. Enjoy your weeks. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back early doors next Monday morning with a brand new episode. Cheers.